It is my pleasure to introduce today Tracey Plowman, COO at Bamboo. She will have the honour of talking to Michael today. So please welcome her to the stage, and Michael will be on shortly.
Thank you. Thank you, Phil.
No worries.
Phil said he's shaking. I am shaking. The amount of people that have come up to me in the last couple of days ask, oh my gosh, what are you going to ask him? Well, you'll find out in a minute. But first, thank you for being here at AusCryptoCon for the second year running. It's a little bit like the Coachella of crypto, and it's because everyone was really excited to get here and pick what you're going to go see. There's so many great stands out there and so many great talks going on. So thank you for picking this one to be at. The theatre is packed out. I remember last year's theatre, it was pretty packed. I couldn't even get in to see this particular man speak because he's very well loved in Australia, and that's why I can still see people streaming in now. So I'll drag this out a little bit so that you can get in here. But I won't speak too long. I will introduce the man right now so that we can listen to him. The man himself, he is an exceptional man. I'm very excited. Here we go. A well-known American entrepreneur, the executive chairman and co-founder of Microstrategy, a published author, an esteemed speaker, and what I would say is the biggest Bitcoin bull in our ecosystem, Mr. Michael Saylor. Put your hands together. Woo! Hello, Michael. Thank you for being here.
Nice to be with you, Tracey. Thanks for having me. Sorry I can't be there in person, but I'm there in spirit and looking forward to our discussion.
Yep. Look, well, I'll start off by saying congratulations. You're finally in the green. Like many of us here, it has been what seems like a very long crypto winter, but it's been a great few weeks. And look, for those who have dollar costed averaged into the market over this, this winter, we finally are in the green. And what we want to know from you is, you've done very well, you're finally in the green. Will you continue to buy Bitcoin, or will you just hold your current position?
You can never have enough Bitcoin. I think the right way to think of this is Bitcoin is going to grow in a serpentine pattern with rapid burst of growth, some drawdown, but on an exponential curve. Right now it's like 45 or 50% compounded annual growth for the past 3.5 years since we got involved. And I think it'll just continue to grow at a high growth rate between 20 and 40 or 20 and 50% for the next 1 to 2 decades. And it'll gradually, the overall long-term growth will probably go from 45% annual to 40 to 35 to 30 to 25 to 20. And it'll hit a terminal growth rate of like 15%. And when it hits that terminal growth rate, maybe 20 years out, maybe 25 years out, it'll be growing twice as fast or compounding twice as fast as the S&P index or any other diversified, high-quality portfolio of assets you could buy. So if you think about it like that, you just say, well, where we are now, we're going to double again, we're going to double again, we're going to double again. Bitcoin's going to continue to progress to $1 million a coin, $2 million a coin, $5 million a coin, $10 million a coin. And when it's $6 million a coin, there's going to be a bunch of people really angry at themselves that they didn't buy it at $1 million a coin. And so I think once you understand it to be the center of the financial universe, right? It's basically the fulcrum around which we all generate leverage. It is the frame of reference of all value and scarcity. Once you get that idea, then the logical thing to do is just to continue to sweep your cash flows into it from month to month to quarter to year to year. You could call that dollar cost averaging, or you could just call it, savings. But, there's no end in sight. I mean, if I told you you could buy Bitcoin at 100,000 and it was going to go to 6 million and you were going to get 60x your money, then why wouldn't you?
Is that financial advice?
I am an advocate of Bitcoin.
Look, we'll move on to the next question. And there's an auditorium here of maybe 1,500 people, and some of those, I would assume, are big followers of yours and probably watched all your YouTube videos like I have. But I really want to talk to you about your Bitcoin and property analogy. And there's probably some new people here who haven't heard you talk about this, so I'm going to go down this path, and I love listening to you do this. So you've stated that Bitcoin is the best property in the world. Can you elaborate on that and what makes Bitcoin the superior asset compared to traditional forms of property, and how this perspective has influenced Microstrategy's investment in Bitcoin?
Sure. Well, when you think about investments that you're going to hold a long period of time, the two that stick out are, should I buy a diversified portfolio of companies like the S&P index, or should I buy a bunch of real estate? And if you buy real estate, like real estate in Miami Beach went from $10,000 an acre to $10 million an acre in less than 100 years. So that works out to be a 7 to 8% growth rate per year, every year for 100 years. And if you have that perfect portfolio of stocks and they're very competitive, then you might get something similar. But when you look at it, investing in stocks is very complicated. Like, name a company that'll still be here in 100 years. Like, how do you establish the S&P index? So if you take a 3-generation or a multi-generational view, it's kind of hard to figure out how I would buy a bunch of companies and hold them 100 years. But on the other hand, holding property for 100 years is very straightforward. The royal family of Japan, or the royal family in the UK, or royal families in the Middle East, they just buy up all the best property and keep it for hundreds of years, right? How long has the British royal family had the center of London? 500 years, 1,000 years, right? The emperors had the center of Tokyo, 1,000 years. So holding the middle of Manhattan, or holding, if I could basically, you remember, I walked through the botanical gardens in Sydney, and I thought it's the most beautiful thing. What if you could own it? Like, what if you could own that entire garden? I don't know, what is it, 50 acres? It's spectacular. Would you ever sell it? Probably not.
You could probably afford to buy it now.
Yeah, but like 500 years ago, right, someone came along and it was there. And so now, property is a good investment, and the reason property goes up by a factor of 1,000 is because if you look at it, what you realize is politicians can't make more of it. You can't print more property. The garden is the garden. The Sydney Harbor is the Sydney Harbor. You're not going to wake up and find out that there's 100x as much beachfront property as there used to be. So when the money supply expands by a factor of 100, and the number of acres on the beach in Miami Beach stays the same, the price per acre goes up by 100. And that's why property is a good investment. The problem with property is you have to buy it in chunks of buildings at a time or acres at a time, and sometimes the best property isn't available for sale. The second problem is there's property tax. So if you owned all the property in the middle of Sydney, you're going to get taxed on it by the mayor and by the province and by the country. And a lot of times people can't afford to pay the property tax for 100 years. And then if someone zones your property, or if there's a war, what if you owned the nicest property in the middle of a war zone? What if you owned all of the nicest property in Ukraine, in Kiev, right? It might be devalued by the war. It could be devalued by a pandemic, by an earthquake, by a tsunami, by a tax. And if I handed you $10 million and you lived in Africa, and you had a choice, buy $10 million worth of property in Zimbabwe, anything in Zimbabwe for $10 million. You could pick anything you want in the entire country and buy it for $10 million. Or would you rather buy Bitcoin, $10 million worth of it? Well, the property in Zimbabwe, maybe it's scarce, but it could be impaired and it's not mobile. And maybe you don't want to live there. And maybe the people with the money in 100 years don't want to move there. So it's not clear that you'll be able to mortgage it or rent it or sell it or carry it with you. But on the other hand, Bitcoin is capped. And Bitcoin is like Manhattan in cyberspace. It's 21 million city blocks in a cyber Manhattan, and one day 8 billion people will want to live there because everybody in the world, all 8 billion people in the world want to be wealthy. They all want to keep their money. There's no one that doesn't want Social Security and economic well-being, not from now to the end of eternity. For 1,000 years, people are going to want the money. So if I created the most stable, most secure, most immutable crypto asset network of 21 million blocks, and everybody in the world understood it, they're all going to want a piece of it. There's only 21 million blocks, and a lot of it's been lost, so probably we're down to 16 or 17 million Bitcoin. And the thing about Bitcoin, which is better than property, is A, it's scarce, but B, it keeps getting more scarce. When people lose their keys, there's less Bitcoin, not more. And it's mobile, and it's portable, and it's fungible. And it passes what I call the Bernard Arno test, which is if you want to make a good investment, you should buy something scarce and desirable that someone richer than you and more cultured than you and smarter than you will want to buy from you in a decade. And that's what I think of when I think of Bernard Arnault, someone richer than me and more cultured than me, and I wonder, would he want to buy this thing? And clearly, $10 million worth of hotel space in Zimbabwe probably may not be that appealing. And you never know with real estate whether the person you want to sell it to is going to want to buy it. And of course, people can make more real estate. They certainly can, not all land is scarce. I mean, the beachfront property is, but farmland in Kansas isn't. There's plenty of land in the middle of Australia that isn't nearly as desirable as the Botanic Gardens in Sydney Harbor. So you got to choose your real estate very carefully, and you can't move it. And if I can't come to your country, I don't want it. But Bitcoin is scarce, it's desirable, it's a global thing, everybody understands it, and I can move it. I can have a $1 billion building in Manhattan, it won't move, but I can have a $1 billion Bitcoin building, and I can send it to Singapore, or I can even get a bank in Singapore to loan me money against it, or maybe want to custody it, or maybe want to borrow it at some point, or I can find a wealthy individual in any city in the world that will want to buy it from me. And you can't say the same for a piece of property in a certain place. So I see Bitcoin as digital property. It has all the great attributes of trophy real estate, but it doesn't have the liabilities and the risks of real estate because it has no physical nexus. It's immutable, immortal, indestructible, and global. And common sense says, if there's 100 billionaires and they're all bidding for your thing, the price is going up. Whereas if there's only one billionaire, that would want that thing, then they will feel like they have you over a barrel and they can give you a lowball bid because there's no other buyer. And so if you're going to own a trophy asset, you want to own something which has global appeal, and you want to be able to take it with you or move it if necessary in order to make sure the value is not impaired. That's why I think of Bitcoin as the apex property of the human race.
Thanks for that explanation. Maybe if we can get the abridged version, I need to explain that to my dad, who's a cattle farmer in rural WA. He's finding it hard to get his head around that. So thank you for that. Look, let's change tact a little bit. I'm going to go to smart contracts and ordinals because there's been a lot of advancements there. And do you believe that this was really in line with Satoshi's core views? And how do you envisage this change and use case and the volatility and security of Bitcoin? Do you see this as an issue?
Yeah, I think Bitcoin is a protocol, and I think it's a good protocol, and it's an asset, and I believe anybody should be able to buy the asset, and anybody should be able to use the protocol. I reserve my criticism and skepticism for people that wish to change the protocol. And so I'm very conservative with regard to that. When I look at Bitcoin, I say, well, Bitcoin is the greatest monetary network in the world, but it's the greatest monetary network because it is the most trustworthy, indestructible, immutable database with the greatest integrity. And it has the greatest integrity because it's a decentralized network and it's running on millions and millions of computers. And we could go into why it is, the most immutable network, but I think we all understand it is. When I send you $1 million of Bitcoin, I'm sending a message from me to you. You wouldn't want it to be hacked or blocked by an enemy of yours or a hostile nation state. And it's a pretty important message. But the real beauty of Bitcoin is I can put any message on that blockchain or on the Bitcoin network and know that it will be there in 100 years. And I can send a message even in the middle of wartime through a war zone, and I can expect it will make it to its destination. That's what it means to be a fault-tolerant, mission-critical, indestructible, immutable database that's truly decentralized. So I think that with regard to ordinals, it's an interesting application, and I actually support all the likely application of Bitcoin. I think that people will burn identities, decentralized identities on Bitcoin, and there's no reason why I wouldn't put, my identity, burn it on the Bitcoin base layer as an orange check, and then start to digitally sign documents and encrypt documents using that public key, private key combination. And I think you can also timestamp documents, so there's no reason why Bitcoin can't emerge as the ultimate cyber notary. If I have a will that's conveying $1 billion, then maybe I'd want to hash the will, timestamp the will, burn it on the blockchain such that nobody can tamper with the will. I think that burning the entire document on the blockchain is another possibility. Look, if it's worthwhile to put the information to convey $1 billion from point A to point B, it might be worthwhile to put a document that conveys $1 billion as well, or any kind of government document or official one. If my choice is to put the data onto a proprietary database owned by a company or owned by a government, in 100 years, it's not clear what company will be here. It's not clear what government will be here. Certainly in 200 or 300 years, almost all governments will be evolved to something different, and all companies will have morphed into something different, will be gone. Books may very well be gone, documents, physical things will be gone. So if you want something to last for a long period of time, you're going to want to put it on the blockchain. Now, I don't know which applications will work. I'm sure the application of sending money will work and storing money will work, and that finances everything else. But authentication, verification, digital signature, digital art, digital notary applications, national security applications, cybersecurity applications, financial security applications, all these things are going to explode. People are going to develop them. Some are going to fail. Some are going to succeed. Most will fail. But ultimately, what is it worth to be able to timestamp and notarize a message forever? Like, what's it worth to actually have an immortal document or a mortal timestamp? And what is it worth to have an indestructible piece of information? And what is it worth to send an unstoppable message? I think it's worth a lot. I think if the country is at war with another country and you're trying to send a message from point A to point B and someone's trying to hack you, I think it might be worth $1 billion to send that message. It's certainly worth $1 billion to send a message conveying $1 billion from wallet A to wallet B. So I think that the block space is undervalued right now. I think that, on slow time periods, you could do a Bitcoin transaction for a quarter. I think burning something forever for the next 10,000 years and sending it in an immutable fashion, unstoppable, past every hacker is worth more than a quarter, right? So if we see things like ordinals evolve, is there a digital painting that's worth $1 billion to me? Not to me, right? But is there a digital document that's worth $1 billion to me? Sure, there is. Okay. So there are applications that are worth a lot of money. And there are applications where I would pay $1, $10, $100, $1,000, or $10,000 or $100,000 to transact on the Bitcoin network. I mean, heck, if you convey a title in a building, move a $100 million building from person A to person B, and you end up paying hundreds of thousands. You might pay $6 million in brokerage fees, or millions of dollars in brokerage fees. You would pay $100,000 in title fees and lawyer fees. So if you're going to move a piece of property, you'll pay the fees. If you're going to store the property forever, you probably won't mind it. I think that ordinals are auspicious and interesting, and they're just one of many, many applications. But I think there'll be lots, and I think that someone's going to crack that code, and the demand for unstoppable, immutable communications, I think that's going to grow, and Bitcoin is going to get a lot more interest from technology developers as they figure out how to anchor cybersecurity, financial security, and other forms of applications into that network.
Okay, thanks for that one. Let's move on to the hot topic of ETFs. There's been a lot of hype on the Bitcoin ETF. Do you think this is going to be approved and sometime soon? And if so, who will be approved first, or will they be approved altogether, which is a common theory?
I mean, I don't have any information that's richer than anything that you would know by reading Twitter, but my opinion is, yes, they'll be approved, and a whole batch of them. I don't know if all of them, but I think a batch will all be approved about the same time.
Okay. And as a follow-up, do you think this changes appetite from investors for something like the Microstrategy offering?
Well, it's a two-part question. I think that the ETF, a spot ETF, definitely increases appetites in general, because right now, in order to buy Bitcoin, you have to set up a relationship with the crypto exchange, and most institutional investors don't have a crypto exchange relationship, and most retail investors don't have one, and most of the time they don't want to add a new one. It takes 10, 20, 30 years for them to establish these relationships. So when the ETF comes on, you could think of an ETF kind of like like a website, like an internet address. It's like, does your company have a URL or an internet address? If so, it's easy to find you. If not, it's really hard to find you. I can find a website in Australia in about 5 seconds with the URL, and it might take me, 3 months to come there and knock on the door. So ETFs are like the universal protocol of access for financial assets. They're revolutionary. If you don't have the ETFs, it's probably, to say it's 100 times harder to buy would be an understatement. It might be 1,000 times harder. And it's not just because of that, but the other catch is, it's not just 1,000 times easier to buy Bitcoin via an ETF, it's also free, because I can finance the deal. If I'm an investor, I could pick up the phone and buy $1 million worth of Bitcoin in about 15 seconds and put up not a dime, because the bank, JP Morgan or Morgan Stanley, will loan me the money. And so you're talking about opening the floodgates to hundreds of trillions of dollars of wealth, where they can buy it in an instant, and they can finance it, and they can buy it no money down. And so right now, and after they bought it, they can borrow against it. And you got to contrast that to the current situation where it takes me a year to set up the account. I have to come up with the cash, and I can't borrow against it, and everybody criticizes me, and then I worry about the crypto exchange failing. So, you know, that's going to be a big change for the industry. It'll be good for everybody, and it's definitely going to be a big boost for Bitcoin. As for MicroStrategy's position, if you look at the futures ETFs, the reason people don't like futures ETFs is by the time you're done with it, they've charged you 10% fee a year. I mean, the cost of rolling the futures is not 1% or 2% a year. It's like 5 or 10 or 20% a year. It's obscenely expensive to cover this with futures. So the spot is going to be a 50 basis point or 100 basis point or something. But let's say 50 basis points. There's a fee to a spot ETF. And over the course of an infinite duration asset, if I charge you 1% a year, that's like taking 20% of your money. 1% a year over the course of 30 years, discounted back with normal interest rates, is like you invest $1 million and you give me 200,000. That's the cost of 1%. The cost of 50 basis points is 10% of your money over the course of the infinite duration. So these ETFs, they charge a fee and they have no leverage. They're unlevered and they charge a fee of some sort. MicroStrategy doesn't charge a fee. We don't charge 50 basis points. We don't charge anything. We basically provide that acquisition and custody service and cover it with our operating business. So we don't charge a fee. We are levered. We use leverage. So we borrowed $2.2 billion at 1.5% interest to buy Bitcoin. If you can borrow $2 billion and pay 1% interest and buy Bitcoin, I would recommend you do it, right? That's not a bad idea. You probably would do it. We actually borrowed $1 billion at 0% interest. And so if you could borrow $1 billion at 0% interest and buy Bitcoin, you probably ought to do that too. But if you can't do that, you can invest in MicroStrategy. So what we are is we are a very special Bitcoin investment vehicle. We don't charge a fee, we use intelligent leverage, and we generate a tax-deferred Bitcoin dividend of sorts because we're acquiring Bitcoin. We use our cash flows to acquire Bitcoin, we use debt to acquire Bitcoin, and we use equity to acquire Bitcoin. So if you want unlevered and to pay a fee, then use the spot ETFs. And if you want levered and you don't want to pay a fee and you want to get some kind of Bitcoin premium, then you would use MicroStrategy. Now, we're obviously more complicated. We're not for everybody. And our capital structure, you couldn't buy $25 billion of MicroStrategy stock on Monday morning. If you did it, it would drive the premiums through the roof. You couldn't squeeze into the asset. But if you're a sovereign wealth fund in the Middle East and you wanted to buy $25 billion of Bitcoin via spot ETF, you could do that and it would trade at parity at the asset value. So those ETFs, they meet a particular need, and it's important for the industry. We need them. We can't move forward without them. But they're not MicroStrategy. We're a very special purpose entity, and we'll stay that way. And we're not going to charge a fee. We're going to continue to use intelligent leverage, and we're going to work to generate that Bitcoin premium. And then, of course, some people will just buy the underlying Bitcoin, and that's fine too. And they'll buy it and they'll put it with a custodian, and others will buy the Bitcoin and they'll self-custody. And they're all different modes of investing in the asset class. There isn't a right answer, except that there's a right answer for specific investors. If you're a wealth fund with $100 billion and you're required by charter to trade through a particular bank in a particular way, you can only buy the ETF, and in a decade you couldn't do anything else. So it's just, you're either going to get their billions of dollars that way, or you're not going to get their money. And so everybody's different. I think the great thing about Bitcoin is the diversity, right? Like I said with the protocol, 1,000 different companies can create their own Bitcoin applications and use the protocol, and it's beneficial to all of us. We all benefit. The winners will win, the losers will lose. And 1,000 different types of investors can buy Bitcoin, and it's beneficial to everybody. So So the more diverse the ecosystem, the more applications, the better it is for the security of Bitcoin, the better it is for the asset price of Bitcoin, the better it is for the political support of Bitcoin everywhere in the world. And so I think generally we should welcome all of these different financial applications. And there's always a tendency to say, well, there's one right one. But you know, the Austrian economics tells you that you don't really know the right answer. All value is subjective. There'll be 100,000 businesses. Some will succeed, some will fail. I've lived long enough to be able to look back at my life and see things I thought were good ideas that didn't turn out well, and to see things that I thought were bad ideas that turned out really well, right? I famously tweeted in 2013 that, you know, Bitcoin's days are numbered and it's going away, and I think Bitcoin was a couple $100 a coin at the time. So I've been famously wrong, and I think that the result of having lived long enough and been wrong about things is it gives you humility. And then when you see other people that want to do something with your network and your asset, you welcome them into the space, and then you wait and you let the market decide. And the market will sort all this out for us. And we're all going to benefit because Bitcoin is really the most pure form of capitalism in the world. It is a market economy with everybody on earth thinking about how they can best contribute to it. And that's one of the things that makes it so special. It's no gatekeepers, open, permissionless, and every smart person, every entrepreneur is trying to figure out how to make your Bitcoin more valuable. And MicroStrategy will do its part, and the ETFs like BlackRock and Fidelity, they'll do their part. And you know, companies like Fidelity, they're going to do lots of different things. They're going to have an ETF. They're also going to have Fidelity Digital Assets, where they actually have Bitcoin custody for high net worth individuals and institutions, but then they've also got a third offering, Fidelity Crypto, which is very different from the first two. So there's lots of different approaches to this, and we should welcome them all.
Thanks for that one. I want to do two more questions, or three if we can get there, but I want to quickly move to Bitcoin mining and securing the network. And as someone with 158,000 Bitcoin, how does MicroStrategy view the role of Bitcoin mining in ensuring the network security and transaction validation? And is there any initiatives from MicroStrategy to participate or invest in Bitcoin mining activities?
I think Bitcoin mining is really amazing, right? We're up to like 460 exahash now. So the mining, the power of the network just keeps getting greater and greater. It's growing 70% a year on average through bear markets and bull markets. The Bitcoin network is secured, in my opinion, by four things. It's secured by electrical power, electricity, like 15 gigawatts of it. It's secured by hash power, computer power, 460 exahash. And that is all the computer power of the world. All the computers in the world that are not Bitcoin miners, if they all started hashing Bitcoin, I don't think they would reach 460 exahash. So it's a lot of computer power, but it's also secured by economic power. There's more than $500 billion that have been invested in the Bitcoin network, and the holders that have invested that money are going to defend the network politically and otherwise. Right, a company like MicroStrategy's invested, $4.6 or $4.7 billion. Before someone screws up the network, you can imagine that all of our lawyers and all of our finance people and all of our technologists and all of our engineers are all going to be doing something about it. And we're not even 1%, right? There's 100x more than us out there, and those people feel strongly too. So economic power matters. And then finally, there's just pure political power. There's 220 million people that have Bitcoin exposure. And 220 million people is a lot of people, a lot of voters, and they all know politicians, and they all know corporations, and they're going to fight. So when you think about all of those actors, and they're all running nodes, and they're all operating mining rigs, and they're all talking and doing things, that's a lot of security, and it's an n-dimensional, it's a multi-dimensional form of security. It's not just mining. But my views on mining is Bitcoin mining hash rate's going to continue to expand. It's going to spread to the four corners of the earth. Every place someone has stranded energy, stranded capital, every place where they want to plug in, they're going to look to Bitcoin mining. Bitcoin mining itself is going to be the primary beneficiary of transaction fees, and long term, the security of the network is going to be driven not by the block rewards. I mean, they will be a primary factor probably till 2035 or so, but in 2035, 99% of the block rewards have been delivered. And the network sometime between now and then is going to transition to transaction fees that are going to be driven by demand, for that very scarce block space. And I think those fees they will move into a growth mode and then a hyper growth mode. And when the transaction fees are growing faster than the hash rate, then Bitcoin mining is going to explode in profitability and blossom everywhere in the world. So I think that when I look at Bitcoin mining and I look at transactions, I really focus upon, what are the transaction revenues relative to the block reward, and that determines how you make business decisions, right? So, if I owned a hydroelectric dam, and I had a gigawatt of free power, then I would look at Bitcoin mining differently than if I had to pay for the energy at a certain price. And so I think that the industry is going to be very dynamic. To be clear, if I had $1 billion right now to invest, I would buy Bitcoin. I wouldn't buy anything else. I wouldn't buy a building. I wouldn't buy an altcoin. I wouldn't buy a power company. I wouldn't buy land. I wouldn't buy real estate. I wouldn't buy a sports team. I wouldn't buy a Picasso painting. There's nothing on earth that I would buy other than Bitcoin if I had that money. I think everything else is risky. And I don't say you can't make money in those other businesses. You can. Bernard Arno makes money in a lot of businesses I don't understand. And so I respect them all. It's just I don't advocate or endorse any of them. I think that if you're the best in the world at something, you know it. You don't need me to tell you. And if you're the best in the world at something, you should go do that thing. You'll probably make money in it. What I believe is if you're not the best in the world at something and you simply want to make an investment and forget about it for 100 years, you buy Bitcoin and just be very careful about how you maintain the keys or how you custody it so you don't lose the keys and the like. And then the market will do the rest of the work for you.
Well, look, that rolls in well to my next question, which is, as someone who's invested some time in educating the public over many different platforms about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency in general, you've had some challenges along the way that you've faced in changing the perception. And how do you plan on continuing to do this and giving some advice to us as we try and do the same thing?
I think that, if you think about the future of Bitcoin, right, it's like 1 or 2% really understood. A friend of mine is in politics, and he said, what we learned in politics a long time ago is nobody knows what you said until you said it 56 times. 56 times. Like you would say the same exact thing 56 different times, and after the 56th time, it might register in their head what you just said, but they're not listening until then. So I believe that people in the crypto industry are very smart, and when you're very smart early in your career, you think that you should say it once or twice, and then you get bored of hearing yourself say it, and you go and you say something else. It's like everybody's got to say 100 different things because they feel like they already solved the problem, so they want to do another thing. I think it's very important to have the humility to note that most of the money in the world is control, and most of the power in the world is in the hands of people that still don't understand what Bitcoin is, and they're not going to get it until you've broached it to them dozens and dozens of times. So my approach to this is stay laser-like focused. That's why I have the laser eyes. Focus, right? And you've got to educate your investors, and you've got to educate your politicians, and you've got to educate your friends and your family, and you've got to I look forward to the time when Apple Computer will build Bitcoin into the iOS, and when Google will build it into the Android phone, and when Microsoft will build it in. But if all these super high-tech people haven't figured it out and built it in yet, you gotta allow for the governor of your state or the president or for octogenarian billionaire investors, you gotta say that it's gonna take them a while to figure this stuff out. So we have a lot of auspicious things happening. We'll win them over. When the SEC approves these spot ETFs, that'll be a big educational experience, and then you'll have BlackRock and Fidelity and 100 other Wall Street firms educating all of the investors that control $900 trillion, and that'll go on for 30 years. It'll take 30 years for them to figure it out. And then at some point, all the big tech companies will follow the lead of, Cash App and all of the forward-looking mobile apps and Lightning wallets, and it'll take them about a decade. And then I think with things like FASB's fair value accounting, right now the accounting for Bitcoin is indefinite and intangible, which makes it toxic to the balance sheet of a publicly traded company. And so going to fair value accounting, which should happen sometime next year, will allow someone to buy $1 billion of Bitcoin and mark it up and mark it down like they would own a security. That's kind of a critical next step, because that opens the door for 7,000 publicly traded companies or hundreds of thousands of companies that use GAAP accounting to consider this. And right now, the CFO would get fired or the CEO would never consider it, and they will instead, like Berkshire Hathaway sits on $160 billion of cash, Apple has $150 billion in cash. They're losing money on the cash, but the only thing they can buy with the cash is sovereign debt right now because of accounting rules, and the sovereign debt yields 5% pre-tax and 3% after tax. So we're going to educate the world by working with the regulators to get all these financial products approved. That's part of it. By working with the accounting community to put in place better accounting standards, by working with financial educators and Wall Street firms, by working with the politicians, by putting monetary engineering classes into universities. We need to teach people crypto theory and monetary theory. And I went to MIT. They didn't have a class in monetary theory. They didn't have a school of monetary engineering. And so I think that lots and lots of parts of our society need to get upgraded. It's going to take time. It'll probably be a transition over the course of 10, 20, 30 years. How long did it take to introduce electricity into the civilization? Or how long did it take to introduce the automobile? Or introduce radio or telephone. So these things take time, one generation, and there's a lot of work everywhere. And as William Gibson said, the future's already with us, but it's not evenly distributed. So there'll be some countries that'll be left behind, and other countries that'll leap ahead, and some companies will leap ahead. But I'm optimistic, and I think everything is developing auspiciously. And all we got to do is just keep our laser eyes on, and everybody you meet and everywhere you go, you have to explain the promise of Bitcoin and help. We need to show everybody, every person, every family, every company, every government, every institution, everybody how Bitcoin can solve their problem, how it makes them better. Right? Because Bitcoin fixes something for everybody. They just don't know what it is, and they don't understand Bitcoin. So if we explain to everybody we meet how Bitcoin helps them, then we will accelerate the adoption at the highest possible rate, and we do a good thing for ourselves, and we do a good thing for them. So that's my view on this, and I think there's never-ending work to do.
Incredibly well said. And you talk there, you're looking quite far into the future there when you say 20, 25, 30 years ahead. So I think as a final question to finish up, where do you see Bitcoin and the ecosystem, in just 4 or 5 years' time as maybe we head out of this next market cycle?
Yeah, well, I think over the next 4 years, the time period from 2020 to 2024 was the transition from this being a retail, offshore, unregulated asset to this being an institutionalized, mainstream asset. And by the time we get to the end of 2024, I think that it will be an adolescent, mainstream asset. So I think that this next 12 months is going to be it's going to be a very big 12 months, because you have demand should double or triple or maybe go up by a factor of 10, anywhere from 2 to 10 demand to buy on a monthly basis. And the supply available for sale will be cut in half in April. And so instead of $1 billion of Bitcoin available for miners each month, it'll be $500 million. And so it's pretty unprecedented that you would go from supply-demand balance of maybe there's $15 billion of organic demand and $12 billion of organic supply. What happens when the one doubles, the other one cuts in half, and then the price has got to adjust up? So I think this is a big 12-month period. It'll be a coming out party, right? It's kind of like the graduation of Bitcoin from college, if you will, and coming out into the real world. And then I think the next 4 years, from 2024 to 2028, now you're going to have ferocious competition among Wall Streeters to get the most asset share, and you're going to have crypto exchanges competing, and you're going to have tech companies getting involved. I mean, Cash App sold $2.5 billion of Bitcoin, a quarter or something like that, so $10 billion a year. At some point, you're going to see all the other mobile tech companies, the Facebooks, the Apples, the Googles, et cetera, think, why wouldn't we want to sell 10 or 20 or $50 billion of Bitcoin a year? So I think 2024 to 2028, that's going to be really the go-go year. It's going to be very exciting. We're still in a high growth stage. I think, we'll stay in a high growth stage until big tech has adopted Bitcoin, when there's 2 or 3 or 4 billion handsets with Bitcoin built into them. That'll be one check. The other check will be when the big mega banks all are Bitcoin custodians, when JP Morgan and Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs and Bank of America and Deutsche Bank and every bank, Commonwealth Bank, when all of them say, it goes without saying that of course they've got to actually custody Bitcoin and make loans against it. When they're making loans and giving you mortgages and custodying it and buying it and selling it, I think that'll be the second check, right? And then the third check is when the entire money management community, right, all the money managers, all the wealth managers, when all of them are recommending Bitcoin to their clients, and it's just a universal global monetary index, right? And I think that those three things are going to drive massive adoption. And when they've all happened, then we'll move into the moderate growth stage. It'll still be growing well, but it won't be explosive growth, because I guess the last thing I left off would be when central banks of nation states are buying Bitcoin, right? That's the fourth leg of this. When all those four things have happened, it's just going to grow twice as fast as everything else, right? But until that's happened, it's going to be a lot of sparks, a lot of fire, a lot of excitement, a lot of green candle days, a lot of FUD, a lot of arguments, a lot of gnashing of teeth, and it's going to grow 2, 3, 4, 5x faster than the next best thing, I think. With volatility, right? With sharp drawdowns, with burst up to the upside. And if you're going to take a 4-year time horizon or longer, you'll be fine. If you try to trade it with a 4-month time horizon or a 4-week time horizon, you're going to give yourself anxiety and nervous fits, and probably you'll wreck yourself. So my advice is enjoy the ride, figure out how you can contribute to the Bitcoin ecosystem using whatever skills, relationships, and know-how you have, and assets you have, and keep your eyes on the horizon. I mean, there's a better world here for all of us, and we've never had such a great opportunity. So take the long view, and enjoy the ride.
Incredibly wise words from Michael there. So we'll finish it up there. Thank you so much for being with us for the second year in a row. It's a packed house here. I know you can't really see it, but again, thank you for being with us and giving us your time very graciously. Look, you're very revered and admired here, not just in the crypto community, but the TradFi community as well. So hopefully one day we'll see you maybe down here in real life, hopefully. It's a wonderful spot, so please put your hands together and thank Michael for being with us today.
Yeah, thanks, Tracey, and thank you to everybody here today. Thanks for hosting me. I'm sorry I can't be there, but I love Sydney, I love Melbourne. I look forward to being in your beautiful country sometime soon. And thank you for your support for Bitcoin, and keep up the good work.
Thanks again, Michael. There we go, folks. Michael Saylor, how's that?